I also felt like Samael in his writings is really heavy-handed. Like, you are born awful. Like, you are scum of the earth, and you are not only are you awful and a sinner, your intentions are bad, and you don't even realize any of that. Like, you're asleep to the suffering you create to yourself and to the world around you. And it would be better if you just died and started over.
Today, we're speaking with Lynn Short about her previous experience with the new Gnostic Society and her involvement as a missionary. This cult had many interesting beliefs, but some of the most striking being lucid dreaming and sex used as a spiritual tool, while simultaneously believing that orgasms are not only an insult to God, but the worst sin possible. This, on top of many things, led members down a dark but gradual path, where by the end, you barely had enough time to finish practices and became your own mental prisoner. What is the new Gnostic Society?
The New Gnostic Society is a group of people that follow the teachings of Samael on Weor, who was, by his own language, a awakened master of consciousness, of that. Yeah, I don't have a better way to describe it other than, he awakened his consciousness fully, at least by his own definitions of what that means. And the idea of consciousness being awakened or transforming into something uh, leans on heavily the Theosophical Society from like the 1800s, late 1800s, with Blavatsky. In fact, he plagiarized quite a bit from her,
Wow.
and the other Theosophists. Uh, so if you want to know who Samael was, that was his awakened consciousness name. His true name was, it's long, but I'm just going to use this the shortened version, was Victor Gomez, and he was born in Colombia in 1917, died in 1977, uh, and he started his teaching of his own awakening experience around the late 1940s, early 50s.
Wow. Samael, and if I recall correctly, he actually passed away, and the cult still continued.
Yes.
What about him was so what about him and his teachings was so captivating and stuck with so many people for so long?
I can only answer what came for me in particular. Uh, I can theorize about what happened for other people. And like in Samael's day, the people he was talking to were probably less literate. And I'm not trying to be insulting by that by any means. It's just the 1900s, and just after the World War. Like, I don't know how literate people were in Mexico and in Colombia, which is where he was from. Uh, so, and this is pre-internet days, so no one has access to information in the same way unless you are working for a library or working for a university. Like, you probably have less access to fact checking this person or checking if there's plagiarism or what he's actually like teaching. uh I'm not entirely sure why, but the teachings traveled up through Mexico and hit the west coast of the United States, and then became part of an English speaking new age group kind of thing that was probably pretty prominent in the 60s and 70s, like the hippie movement and the counterculture movement. This was pretty countercultural, uh, given its teachings. I The only thing I can think of as to why it has stuck around is because of how extreme, my opinion, extreme the teachings are, like there's so much about it that is required uh, of the participant. And I think that that sort of discipline, given our American mindset of like devil may care and loose ends and, you know, whatever else, I think it might have been appealing to certain groups of people.
Wow. Okay. Well, let's get into the details on the practices. What I think let's start with your first contact with the cults. How did it feel like to first get involved? What does it present as, and what do you tell people?
As far as what I noticed when I first came in, so I was, uh, generally speaking, people get involved in a group that is high control based on how vulnerable they are in the moment. It doesn't matter your intelligence, it doesn't matter your class, meaning economic status. Uh, Anybody can be vulnerable given the moment. And the moment for me was I had just moved from Colorado into Portland, Oregon, and a friend of mine was really into new age stuff, and I found a flyer for lucid dreaming, which he had a couple of books on his bookshelf about lucid dreaming, and I'm like, oh, he'll be super interested in this flyer. And you know, this was early 2000s, it was 2001, and so still a little before social media kind of really became a big thing. So it was flyers or public talks that you would give, that you would invite people in. So no one was like doing social media about Gnosis or anything at the time. Uh, Cell phones were still problematic at that point. um, so I brought the flyer home, and his girlfriend, who I thought might want to go with him, didn't want to go. And so I went with him to this thing because I had nothing better to do. I hadn't gotten my license for massage therapy yet. And right off the bat, the instructor who was there was a very seemingly deep person. He knew all of these secret things, and he had all of this weird knowledge that I was drawn to. My original hook, I would call it, would be that I missed academia, and I missed being in college. I had gotten a bachelor's degree not that long ago, and I missed having nerdy conversations about consciousness. I got a degree in philosophy and anthropology. It, you know, very fairly useless, but I really missed that that knowledge, and I wanted to have more of it. And here was this sort of seemingly on a platter given by this seemingly learned person. And I'm not trying to imply that he wasn't learned, it's just whether the knowledge itself was really deep or not. Uh, and that was my hook. It was very interesting to me, and this guy seemed really interesting to me.
So when you first got there, it didn't seem too off. It wasn't, it just felt like it felt pretty normal.
It didn't feel normal so much as uh, it felt special. It felt like I was learning something that, and certainly it was sold to us that way, that we were being taught information that was hidden on purpose, and had been revealed in secret, quiet ways by other masters along the eras. And but Samael had been given allowance to teach all of it all at once. And so and it was all interesting things about what consciousness was and what meditation was, and what the meaning of life was. And I found all of that very interesting. And here was this teacher that wasn't claiming He never claimed that this was his teaching. He wasn't the guru. The guru was Samael. So it felt safer to me instead of going to like someone who was like, this is my teaching and I'm the guru, worship me. It wasn't that kind of cult. So it felt more like, oh, while this information isn't normal, this is fine. This is safe because he's not claiming ownership about this. He is not taking responsibility for this. He's the teacher, not the avatar.
Wow, that makes sense. It's like, oh, if this guy believes it and he's so passionate, it must mean
Yeah.
something.
Yes, and he was definitely a very passionate, at the time I would have called him a really good instructor, because he knew his stuff thoroughly, through and through, and claimed to have his own awakened experience. Not that he was claiming he was fully awakened, just that he had lots of experiences, which means he's able to lucid dream. He can leave the body at will at night. He can meditate very deeply. Those are the indicators of levels of awakenedness.
That makes sense. So it's just lucid dreams, spirituality, consciousness. And that was like the introduction.
Yes.
When did you start getting more into the sex and like the more extreme beliefs? So was it the second time, the third time?
Uh, if I remember correctly, it was about 9 months into it. Uh, like in the beginning, it was very much about like, what do you do with your attention during the day? And do you just allow your mind to wander? And do you observe your life? And those are really easy practices to practice, which aren't necessarily bad things to kind of consider. Like, oh, do I just think my negative thoughts all of the time? And what do I do with the attention that is myself? Like, that's kind of a like, huh, what do I do with myself? It was about 9 months in that we were told that masturbation and orgasm were basically the original sin. Like, having an orgasm was stealing the energy of God, which is the highest crime, higher than murder, higher than lying, higher than any other bad thing you can think of, because you are taking the energy of creation and using it for your own interest, your own will, your own pleasure.
Wow.
So that was about 9 months in.
9 months. From
Yeah.
there on in, it just kind of felt it was just all about lucid dreaming, spirituality and all that. And then you didn't really get into. So by the time they told you, you were
Yeah.
so invested.
We had become invested. Yeah. And it was like my friend who I had introduced the flyer to, I was very much in love with. And uh he was looking like he was gonna make a commitment to this group. And I was thinking this was like around that time. And I was thinking I would probably leave because it wasn't quite the right fit for me. Like, I was interested in consciousness and meditation and these things. And he had had one retreat, and I came to the second retreat that had been offered by this teacher of Samael's. And even after the retreat, while I had a very nice experience, uh, I was thinking, wow, I don't think it's for me. And then Justin, who's my now husband, was like, hey, so I really want to marry you. Would you stay in this thing with me? And how could I refuse? So the issue with sex means that coupling up is super important. Making sure that you have a partner that's on the same page as the teaching gives about retaining your sexual energy, which means not having an orgasm, having sex but not having an orgasm. uh, that would be really hard to do if you weren't with a person that also was following the same belief.
Wow. That sounds like a very intense and emotional moment from so many different angles.
Yeah.
I can understand how it was so captivating and it kind of got you. So not only were you getting invested, but also your partner. Now there's marriage,
Yes.
and it's like it's all
Yeah.
related.
Yep. Yep.
Uh,
Like I probably wouldn't have stayed involved if it weren't for the fact that Justin basically proposed. Uh, and well, this year we have our 20th wedding anniversary. So
and that's amazing that you guys stuck.
yeah,
Like that's just wow.
yeah, that's its own story. But yeah,
Yeah. So the second chamber then, so was it just I presume this is the second chamber after 9 months.
no, actually, no. So the public teaching allows for the introduction to the idea of a sexual teaching. Uh, the second chamber is for people who have fully committed to Samael, which takes anywhere from another 3 to 5 years to have access to, unless you are with a group, because each center, which is in different towns, depends on how quickly they're trying to get people through the first chamber stuff, which is the public. First chamber is the public level and the meditation level, and that can take as long as 2 to 3 years and as short as a year, depending on the missionary and what they think the individual, like, oh, these guys really get it, or they're really committed and they really love Gnosis and Samael, and we're just going to push them through, versus people who have skepticism or doubts or questions about Samael or the teachings, we're going to hold them back.
Wow. Okay. So at this point, so after the 9 months, it was like you're
Still
getting
first
more.
chamber, it's still the public level. Yeah, we
Uh,
haven't we were not we were not initiated until, so we started in 2001, and we Justin and I were not initiated into second chamber until, if I remember correctly, it was like 2005.
two,
So that's 4 years.
4 years.
Yeah.
And what were up leading to the second chamber? What were so up until now? It's been mostly okay. Spirituality, consciousness, lucid dreaming, and then like sex is the greatest sin, or orgasming is the greatest sin.
Orgasm. Sex is fine. You just can't orgasm.
Oh yeah, that's right, and that's gonna be very interesting. I forgot.
Yeah.
And then what was that it up until the second chamber that they kind of told you, or was there more things that they were telling you up in?
That was the big one. That was the big one. There were other slowly, it was like, well, you needed to develop discipline in certain areas of like your life. So if, for example, if you worked in a bar, you would be highly encouraged not to work in a bar anymore. Uh, if you worked in any kind of sex industry, you worked in a porn shop or something, highly encouraged not to work there anymore. In fact, we knew of a couple of women who worked in the sex industry and did change their lives, and probably for the better. I'm not one to criticize people who work in the sex industry anymore by any means. Um, but, these people felt better leaving. So booyah for them for leaving.
Wow. So this was a good foreshadow for okay, there are positive elements to what they're doing, but the grip and the control, not just on your lives, but how you think of yourself and how
Yes.
and how to control your thoughts, like you yourself control your thoughts.
Yes.
That's how it started.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So very early on, there was instruction, and this is this isn't just by this particular teacher. This is kind of like by the society, like having some awareness of or control of your thoughts. So you would try to interrupt your thought process during the day. This led to two things. One, you're not thinking your thoughts as much. And two, it allows for calming the mind so that lucid dreaming is more possible. So the less busy your mind is, the more likely lucid dreaming can happen or leaving the body can happen. And, I've been able to verify that. When you go on a meditation retreat and you're told not to think nearly as much, you're usually given a mantra to say during the day so that you quiet and still the mind and you're not that busy and there's no internet and these kinds of things. And so very similar sorts of tactics or ideas uh, in the Gnostic Society,
Wow. So that's very
which
interesting.
isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like,
Right.
depends on how far you take it.
Yeah. That's the yeah, like it's a balance. So what so once you got in, and again, like this was, you said 4 years until chamber two?
Chamber two is approximately 4 or 5 years in. I cannot remember exactly
Right.
the date. Uh, yeah, that's lost to my time.
Totally okay. So once
Yeah,
you're in chamber two, now and it's been like, again, like 4 years, a long time, a lot of investment, a lot of emotions.
yeah.
What were they telling you then?
It kind of felt more of the same, except like meditation was still super important. The only thing was time commitment. So instead of like once a week or twice a week, it was now 3 or 4 times a week. And there was a special mass that you did that was very Catholic like, uh, that you had to attend. And yes, you could be absent, but you had to have a good reason and you couldn't do it frequently. There were requirements of your time and commitment. And the the second chamber was very much like church. It was, you came prepared for that, you came dressed well, and then you put on your vestment because we all had a costume, a vestment that we put on, robes. And then we would go into the second chamber and have either a meditation or we'd have a ritual or we'd have the mass. And these were like short plays that we would put on. Sometimes everyone had a role, sometimes not. It depended on the ritual, it depended on what was happening. Um, it was pretty banal. Like, it was fine. It wasn't evil or weird. It was just more commitment.
Wow. Okay, so same thing still. uh
Except we
Orga
were dressed up.
the
Yeah.
dressed up.
Yeah.
Wow. And
Yeah.
then commitment was like a big thing. And that's a
It
big
was
deal.
huge. It was huge. And taking care of the temple, which is where we had church. Like, it was a separate room and it had to follow, it didn't have to look the same in every single temple, but it had particularities that were almost required. Like, if you couldn't find a particular item, you could kind of make it or fake it until you could find it. So like a black and white checkered floor was a requirement. 3 steps up to the altar was kind of a requirement. Having particular implements, having a tabernacle, which is what a small building looking thing that houses the cup that this goblet that the priest drinks out of. Like, all of these things were sort of required, and you weren't, until you had all of the implements, you weren't supposed to open a second chamber. You couldn't kind of half-ass it. It was, you kind of had to have all of the implements there.
Wow. Okay. And how long from chamber two to chamber three? How long did that last?
That process could take a long time. Like that was really left up to the missionaries that were running that group, and that usually required quite a bit more commitment because it was yet another day totally separate from second chamber or first chamber, and the requirement was more that you were willing to be confessional of your sins. So the things that you were observing, you were given the that week you were given, or that month, it was actually usually about a month or 2 month process, where you would read through the Pista Sophia, which is a thing that's separate from the Bible but similar, and you would pick different chapters and you would meditate on that particularity for the month, and then you would kind of how your life uh, evolved throughout that month, manifested throughout that month, is you would then look and report back like what you had observed in regards to lust, or in regards to rage, or in regards to fear. Like you would report back like, I had these moments with my clients or at work or fill in the blank, uh and that's how that would proceed. And everyone was kind of expected to participate with that. You weren't allowed really to, like, you couldn't opt out. You had to like confess, like, oh, these were the sins I witnessed in myself.
Wow. Wow.
And
And
it kind of seemed like, in my own experience with our own our own third chamber, Justin and I were never invited into third chamber. We were missionaries at that point, and we created the third chamber. Uh, it seemed to me that people were either A, overly criticizing their lives, like, I had a mean thought about Sally, and that is my sin, or they didn't really understand the assignment and like couldn't really generate feedback about themselves. So how this was helping, I don't know.
at that point, that's when you're starting to see the problems.
Oh, way before that, but yeah, that
Oh,
was another that was another aspect of it for sure.
when did you start seeing the problems then? When was it?
I personally, now that I've done lots of therapy, I personally had struggles right away because there were inconsistencies with the teaching. And I also felt like Samael in his writings is really heavy handed. Like, you are born awful. Like, you are scum of the earth, and you are, not only are you awful and a sinner, your intentions are bad, and you don't even realize any of that. Like, you're asleep to the suffering you create to yourself and to the world around you. And it would be better if you just died and started over. Uh,
Wow.
so that's just too harsh to come to. Like, I understand that there are things inside of myself that I am unaware of that are habits or cause me suffering, but chiding me to that level isn't going to get me to change any of that. I'm just going to feel awful. And I did.
Wow. So at that point, that makes sense. That's terrible. And then this whole time, and you're having these feelings, but it's like you have this group that you've been. It sounds like it's like this group of people, similar group of people that you were coming in and out with the first and the second chamber.
Oh yeah, yeah. We kind of, usually, it was kind of the same people all of the time. Uh, the first chamber would change a little bit more frequently because that's your introduction, and people are like, "Oh, I maybe don't like this," or "Oh my gosh, uh, all of these people are super into this. Maybe there's something there. And so people would stick around. Second chamber, definitely, you have less people leaving in second chamber, and certainly less, more so with third chamber.
Wow, that makes sense. So you were having these feelings and it was painful, but it's like, I'm with this group, we've been doing this and it
I'm
seems so.
committed. My husband is committed. If I, the thing about Gnosis is if you want to leave and your partner is involved in it, it's going to put you two in conflict, especially because of the sexual teaching. So if you think, this isn't for me, I'm going to take off, it generally will split up the partnership. Like there's just kind of no way around that. I
Wow,
saw, I witnessed many couples break up their relationship because one person was like, I can't really do this, and the other person was committed.
that makes sense. When did, I don't think I asked this, but they were teaching you pretty early on about orgasming is the worst sin. When was that translating to, okay, we can't be having sex normally anymore?
Right away.
Oh, right away.
Right away. Yeah, completely right away. Justin and I hadn't become a couple until after knowing that information. And we were instructed, I mean, one, in the books of Samael, Samael's dead, right? So we can't ask him like issues that we have with the practice of sexual alchemy, is what it was called. Um, so no one's there to talk us through that except for our instructor who had his own issues. And I don't mean that like in a bad way. He just had his own struggles. And I'm not, you know, of liberty to talk about that because they were his. Um, it makes it sound really vague and bad, but um, the instruction in the books was really minuscule. It was like, well, don't move around very much when you have intercourse, and don't think of lust, and sing these mantras and pray to your divine mother to help you not have an orgasm. And that was about it. Like, that's no instruction really at all. And when I personally started having trouble with the practice of sexual alchemy, the first like 7-ish years uh was not that problematic. I don't know why. And then sometime after that, uh, it became really hard not to have an orgasm. And something in my body changed, or psychosomatically, I was rebelling. I don't really have an answer on that. I do know my body changed because I got older. Uh, and then it became super easy to have an orgasm. Don't know why. Uh, and so all of the instruction that I personally got when I went to people, like, this is a problem, this is the core, this is the fork in the road for the teaching of Gnosis, is you cannot have an orgasm. You can you cannot really be mindful, you cannot really do your self-observation, you cannot really do your exercises. The one thing you have to solidly be committed upon is not having an orgasm. And this became a problem for me. And the advice I got was awful, awful advice. It was things like pray more, and you need to be fully committed. You're not fully committed. Uh, uh, do more pranayama, which is this breathing exercise that you do. Um, have sex for 3 minutes, which is super not satisfying. Only have sex on Friday, which is something Justin was told. Uh, like magically that's gonna make it better. Uh, and yeah, so just this very critical eye about how this was my fault. This was my problem.
Wow. And the and because of the commitment obviously with you and your partner and the group, it's like we're all committed to this, and I'm doing literally the worst sin possible,
Right. Yeah.
and the shame that they gave.
Yes. Yeah. Shame. The fear that I was causing my husband to fall as well as myself. Uh, the the worry about this entity that is my divine mother and how I was harming her and how she must hate me because I was failing at this. And it wasn't like I always knew I was about to spill or have an orgasm. It was that uh, sometimes it just happened and I couldn't control it. And uh, I I was at a loss of what to do with any of that. And so there was a struggle in myself as far as uh, shaming myself and blaming myself and feeling pretty miserable from that.
Wow.
I don't, that's not very deep, but
No, no, I understand. That's I'm sorry, I don't understand. I mean, I can only imagine the pain. I mean, that's like it's really I'm a loss for words to even how to put in how to describe that. That's horrible.
yeah.
Why was it so important? Why was in Gnosis the sex but the orgasming not happening? Why was that so core to the beliefs that they were willing to shame their members, traumatize, members and hurt so many people? Why was that so important?
So in the Gnostic theology, doctrine, the sexual energy is the consciousness. And so if you misuse the sexual energy, if you misuse the consciousness, you are destroying your ability to uh, become immortal, to build your soul. So you are not, in Samael's teaching, and including theosophy, like you are not born with a soul. You are born with the opportunity to create it. And so you create it through the sexual practice and other practices. Uh, it's through the sexual energy that you can eliminate the ego, which is the thing that causes you to not be connected to God. So the sexual practice and the meditation practice is the crux of regaining your consciousness away from your bodily desires, which are the strongest forms of sleep. Uh, they the bodily desires keep you trapped in the gross material realm. And the only way to escape the gross material realm is to rise above it. The only way to rise above that is by using these practices. And to fail means you're sinning and not creating soul.
Wow. That's where, yeah, I mean, that's like,
So, yeah. So to have an orgasm means you are diminishing your work on yourself. You are uh, like you can build up your work by practicing all the things and doing them well. And then by having an orgasm, you diminish your work and you have to keep rebuilding your work. Uh, yeah, that's
so there's this constant feeling of catch up. I need to catch up to
yes.
everybody else,
Yeah.
and
Unless you can somehow control your sexual energy, which I imagine not everybody does. I
yeah,
am sure there are people that do it quite well and are disciplined in the physicality part of it. Because I certainly didn't want to have an orgasm. That's just shit that happened to me. Uh, yeah.
yeah. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, sex is such a fundamental part, and I can only, I mean, I can't even picture not, having sex and not orgasming every single time. I mean, that, and then the shame and the meaning behind that, like you're saying.
Right. Right.
What, from there, when did the micromanaging of yourself become more prominent? Was it also around that time of the
It
set?
was right from the beginning. Like right from the beginning, we were instructed to, and this would have been true in any center, not just the one that we attended. Um, right from the beginning, we were told to discipline ourselves about what we did with our energy, not just the sexual energy, but our daily like functions. Like, what are you doing with your attention? Uh, what are you spending? Where are you going for entertainment? Is it more is the entertainment that you engage in more or less gosh, there's a correct word for this. um Dignified. Is it dignified, or is it more sacred than other forms of entertainment you might engage in? So are you watching violent movies? Are you watching movies with a lot of sexual content? Not even, not porn, because that was out of the question, but like, are you watching something, 9.5 Weeks, which is super old 80s sexy film? Oh, sorry. um uh uh yeah, what are you doing with your, like, the control part started fairly quickly and was part of our whole trip.
So that,
As you committed, more and more requirements were required of you, especially if you were a missionary.
wow. So that's, so it was, it sounds like this invisible hand that's gripping your life. It was gradual, but like you're saying, it started very early. And by the
It was
time
gradual. Yeah.
and by the time you realize it, it was choking you. And like, where did you even have time to think? You had to go.
You don't. You don't. And in particular with Justin and my circumstance, so we did the missionary training in 2007, and right away we ended up taking over the Portland school, which was really busy. We had uh not quite yet ready for third chamber, but so we had a fully functioning public group, which was 2 nights a week. And then we had our meditation chamber, which was still public chamber, but also took its own night a week. And then we had second chamber, which was usually 2 nights a week. Um, one night was for just, you showed up, you put on your vestment, you went in the temple and you meditated, and then that was it. And then the next night was like, so we're there 4 to 6 nights a week at the center, which was in our house, so you couldn't escape it, uh, doing different practices, in addition to working your full-time job, in addition to trying to create the lectures or the sermons or the practices, and in addition to doing your own work, whether that's meditating enough, doing the lucid dreaming practices, which usually required some sleep deprivation. Uh, so yeah, we were a little busy.
Wow. So
So we
even seeing.
didn't really have time to think it through. Just had to keep plugging along.
And would you say that is more of a consequence, or would you say that's intentional that you couldn't think?
I don't think that that's intentional. I think the people are very sincere. I don't feel like anybody we ever came across was like, you know, twisting mustache, like, hey, I'm gonna fuck with these people. Like, everyone was on board with the same thing, and there was no main guru to point to that was doing the thing to us. It was a culture of people that were committed to doing the same thing. I don't know what's actually worse, having something like David Koresh with the Waco thing, or the Mason family. Those are bad examples because there's killings involved. Um, but like a group of people that are following a individual, I don't know what's worse, that or a weird culture that we're all committed to the same thing. There's probably as bad things in each one, just it's a different configuration.
Right. In a way, it kind of immortalizes the Samael or the leader because when they're alive and they're there, you can kind of talk to them and question them. But on death, it's more profound. It's like this was his words before leaving us, and then you can kind of interpret that too, to fit.
Absolutely.
That makes sense.
In our society, so when Samael died, the the Gnostic groups kind of splintered off into different factions, and the faction that we were associated with was the Gnostic Society. And in the Gnostic Society, there were two main directors. One is in Australia. His name is Raphael Arape, and the one in Rome is Raphael Vargas. So they both influence the Gnostic Society, as our group is called, um, and contribute to sort of directing how the groups manifest. So, like, Vargas is really clear that the Gnostic instructors, the missionaries, should only instruct out of the books of Samael. We don't need to look outside of the books. We don't need to look up how to meditate from Buddhists, for example. Like, just stick with the books. That's all you need. Don't go beyond that. And he's very focused on the coming apocalypse because it's a very apocalyptic focused religion. Raphael, uh, in or Arape, because they're both named Raphael. Arape in Australia is a little different. He's less about sleep deprivation and struggling. He's more about destroying the ego on the march. So what that means is as you are walking through your day, you're eliminating the ego by like noticing when your anger arises when you see your boss and you're like, nope, I'm not going to engage. You're basically repressing the fuck out of yourself. Like, nope, I'm not going to engage with that anger. You say a mantra that's supposed to dissolve it, and you try to ignore the fact that you're having feelings, basically. That's Arape's bag of tricks.
Wow, that's fascinating. And each one had their own influence. Was it and so these were the two main people kind of
Two main directors, yeah.
up until this point we've been talking about chamber one, I guess chamber one and a half, and then chamber two.
Two, yeah.
You said that you became a missionary by the time you reached chamber three. In fact, you were involved with creating it. How was
Yeah.
that? How was that like to? What was the transition like to becoming a missionary and doing that?
So, okay, that's kind of two questions, so I'll break
Oh,
it down. No, that's fine. So becoming a missionary, we became missionaries in 2007, and unfortunately for the Gnostic Society, um, it's a 3 month process, which means after 3 months, you are told go out and take care of people's spiritual and psychological well-being, which is no training at all. This is one of the biggest resentments I have in regards to the teachings of Samael, is that you were just sort of handed off to people and somehow trained to take care of people. When let's take becoming a monk is years of process. If you want to be a chaplain, that's years of process. If you want to be a priest, that's years of process and vetting. Uh, and none of that was happening. It's like, well, if you like Samael enough and you've been around long enough, you can become a missionary. Uh, we won't even really care about your past. That's important for later. And then so we became missionaries in 2007, and opening up third chamber was kind of like anticlimactic. Like it just was like, it was just like, okay, well, we have another night that we're in the temple, and these particular individuals who've been around long enough in second chamber, they're invited to attend. There's no requirement. If you're in second chamber, there's a requirement and a commitment. And being invited into third chamber does not require the same level of commitment, except for the confessional part. You're supposed to be doing more work and more things, which you're not really doing more things. You're just like praying about the Pieta Sophia and trying to invoke in the mythology of things. It's very mysticism. You're invoking and calling out to the different parts of the being to involve themselves in your life and to create challenges. You're asking for, say, Saint Peter to come and pull you into circumstances to create the obstacles so that you can observe the bad lust you have. um, which is just you praying for a certain thing. And whether that seems to manifest in your life that week, I don't know. Like, sure, sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't, and you had to kind of make shit up.
Wow. And so in other words,
We
you
were
like,
told it was this super profound thing, and it became this like, not really.
wow. So like like you're saying, they just kind of threw you as a missionary, like, okay, you're ready, go, you
Yep.
know. And that was a really good, really interesting thing you mentioned, foreshadowing, which was they didn't look into their past. What what did what was the consequences of that?
So the consequences of that was, so we ended up, Justin and I ended up taking care of the Portland school. Generally, when you're a missionary, you are sent off to a new city and you create a new center. And so it was a little odd that it was a little less regular that Justin and I were taking over the Portland school. But allowed us to enroll the Portland school into the Gnostic Society. The person who we had been trained under was an independent and wasn't part of the society. And so we were, what's a good word? We were initiating the Portland school into the Gnostic Society. We were becoming part of the Gnostic Society. Um, so when we moved on to create another mission in 2012, we left Portland to come to see, Spokane to open a new center. The person that we left the Portland school to is an abominable human being. And I do not use that term loosely. He's awful human being. He came from Australia and took over the center and really pushed and doubled down on the negative aspects of Samael's teachings, told the students that they hated God, and told them that they're asleep to the worst things inside of them, and really pushed. He was very heavy-handed and seemingly disciplined. Meanwhile, he was secretly getting high and courting several of the women students, married one of them, but was still sort of grooming. I know that term is overused now, but there's no other better word for it. Grooming several other women, and then started an affair with a third, and uh, kicked out his own wife during that period of the center. He kicked her out of the center and the school with his son, um, with his newborn son. Super great. Like, he's just an abominable human being. Uh, I have no good things to say about him.
And then that's who they were putting in charge as a missionary.
Well, they didn't. we made the agreement. So this is the tricksy part. When a missionary leaves the center, they they look for another missionary or inquire if there's other missionaries that are interested in moving to that center. And so he was the first person that answered. And so he seemed legit. Like Justin and I just assumed he was a good guy. And he certainly had the fire of gnosis in him. He certainly knew the teachings. He certainly was seemingly disciplined. We didn't know his secret life. You don't know all of these things. And so we left thinking the best of him and thinking he would be good for the students because he would carry on a new level of discipline because Justin and I aren't that harsh. So that was the vetting. Like it was just me and Justin vetting this person. And we're not, again, our training was 3 months long and we were overworked. We were overwhelmed and tired. And it was like, well, he's fine. He's great. We can move on to the next city and start our practice or start our center over again. Were there some red flags? A few, but nothing that like waved so high in the air that was like, oh, fuck this. No, this is awful. He was just kind of a dick and just kind of really super uh like adherent to the doctrine. And it was like, well, he's doing what you're supposed to do. So we just thought that was fine. And then when the shit hit the fan, when the scandal all blew up, which was around 2016, May of 2016, we we were pretty overwhelmed by Justin and myself were pretty like shocked that the director and the people that came to sort of take care of the circumstances, which was a couple of missionaries from Seattle, that they left the choice to the students who had been abused by this man. The men were also not immune to his abuse. It just was more emotional and controlling abuse, not sexual abuse. So they let it be the student's choice that they keep him as a teacher or get a new one, which I found pretty abysmal.
Hmm. Wow. And this was, oh my God. It's just,
There's so much. It's so much.
that's insane. That's, and this is and it's crazy to think because how many people live these lives, it's insane to think that this even happens today. It feels,
Yeah.
something like that. I would think like, oh, 1800, but that was like old human stuff. And
Well, if you think about like the Southern Baptist Church and the trouble they've had with sexual um, assault allegations, like it's not that surprising.
really, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's true. No, you're right. It's when I'm just amazed by all this because it's it's like, okay, it's pretty bad, and then you keep saying like, okay, it's really bad, and then you keep going like, wow, it's like horrible, and then you're like, holy shit, it is terrible, like horrific, and you just,
It's pretty bad. There's still more scandal I can tell you about. So,
well, when did it start? When did you, what was it like? Okay, my husband's involved. I'm a missionary. I've been doing this for a long time. I've been seeing these people. I'm in charge of these things. I just can't take it. I have to get out.
so that was about That was about a 2-year process. So in 2016, the big scandal happened with the Portland crew. And I I was just so blown away with how bad the organization handled it and how they were more worried about the optics of Gnosis and the longevity of Gnosis than they were the people that were harmed by this particular missionary. Like that was like they were concerned, but not in the same way. Like the people definitely took uh, a second seat to the organization and whether Gnosis would thrive. Um, the woman that had been the sexual assault victim was basically a scapegoat. It's just awful. Um, and then other scandals happened. The short version of those is a missionary couple in Colorado. The wife committed suicide. Don't know the details. And the husband, they were very young. They were in their early 20s. And I don't know what part that plays into it as far as idealism and how they interpreted the doctrine. But so she commits suicide, and the husband is starting to date a student that was under his tutelage about 2 months later after her death. So he's either just a dick or he's completely repressing his grief about the wife committing suicide and what that means. And because they had been together for a couple of years at that point. Uh, and, or somewhere in between those 2 points, being a dick and being repressive about what it meant for him. And then the last straw was finding out that a woman in Seattle was coupled up with a partner. He wasn't a missionary, but very committed to the teachings, committed so much so that he was forcing his partner to have sex with him. So spousal rape was occurring, and she didn't know what she should do because the doctrine teaches you that your pain is your ego. And so if you are having pain, you should just reinterpret that. That's just your ego experiencing pain, not your consciousness. And so your job is to either endure your suffering or you learn from it and ascend over it. Uh, and so
Wow.
she wasn't complaining about it because that would be egoic. She wasn't telling her partner that this is problematic. Uh, and she wasn't telling her missionaries that this was occurring until she finally couldn't handle it anymore and had an event, meaning that she had a breakdown and divulged all this information. And uh, at that point, I was like, okay, I'm out because no one did anything about the sexual crime of spousal rape. Again, it was more about the optics of Gnosis and how do we protect the Gnostic path rather than worry about these individuals' lives. No one was checking in on the missionary who was dating his student after his wife killed herself. No one's like, hey, maybe slow down and how are you? Like, no one's checking in on him. It's just, well, that's your personal experience. So I guess you'll figure that out. So that was kind of my breaking at that point. It was just one event after the other and watching the organization fail miserably at taking care of the people, doing the right thing. I don't know what the right thing would necessarily be, but certainly not what was done or not done. And uh, because of the sexual practice, the very real risk of me losing my husband because of the sexual practice uh, was imminent in my mind, but I could not fathom trying to do the work anymore. I felt like if I stayed in Gnosis, I would metaphorically have to die, but not in the consciousness kind of way. It was, yeah, that was
Right.
it.
Wow.
So that was
That,
July 2008, or excuse me, 2018.
I mean, that's just so, I mean, that's so much to unpack. It was what, it, it was just a recipe for disaster. I mean, just listening to you talk about how like you talking about your pain is egoistic. That's just a recipe for abuse. I mean,
Yeah,
and like you're saying, it's interesting. The thing that I find most interesting is that it doesn't sound like the intention was to cause this kind of pain. The intention was, let's be better human beings. And what does that mean? And let's take that literally. And then
right.
once you take it too literally on this, subjective idea of what a good human being is, the consequences leads to that, you know.
Yeah,
That's insane. Um,
yeah,
is
yeah.
this?
Gnostics definitely turn suffering into a virtue. So if you're suffering, you're doing it right.
Wow. Oh my God. I'm.
Because Christ suffered, Christ suffered on the cross for our sins. And so we should embrace our own suffering to that level at least.
Well, meanwhile, like you're saying, in a doctrine, you're born as essentially just like scum of the earth, like you said,
Yep.
a human
Yep.
being. You've committed so many sins before you even got there. So in other words,
Yep.
you have
Because
debt.
all the sins of your past lifetime are rolled into this lifetime, and you owe karma for those past transgressions.
Wow. So you have debt before you even get there.
Yes, definitely.
And you have no time to think because you're having to
I
constantly go
didn't
to
know.
events.
Yeah.
You, I mean, like you're constantly self-criticizing. So even the
Yep.
seconds you are able to think, it's about yourself and what you could be doing
Yep.
better.
Yep. What did I do wrong that day? And just like this hyper evaluation of uh your inner life and how you are evaluating yourself in the world or other people in the world. Uh yeah.
Wow.
And that's certainly how I took it on. My husband seemed to I would love to live in his brain because he seemingly was able to like just let that sort of water off a duck's back. Like it was more about for him meditation and uh sort of the nerdy topics that we were talking about and less about the crime of your lack of consciousness.
It feels like listening to you that everyone was suffering, but it seems like women suffered the most.
I think it depended on who you were, honestly. Like uh I think I saw plenty of men that suffered emotionally,
Wow. Okay.
certainly. I think it
So
just depends on the individual. Some people can kind of roll with it, like, oh, cool, I'm just being asked to observe my life. Neat. Other people, they're going to take it on in a way. I certainly took it very seriously. Like, I took the practices very seriously and wanted to do them correctly and rightly. And I think that is just an aspect of my personality as a person. And uh, I think that added to the dilemma that I was in.
okay, that's interesting. That's good to know because it felt like the cult was because a lot of cults they do target women, and I was that was kind of the impression I was getting. But it's
Gotcha.
interesting to know that it was just kind of everybody.
It
Wow.
kind of could be anybody. It just depended on how the doctrine affected you. For some people, the sexual practice might be the easiest part of it, you know. Uh, uh, some women would find it difficult to, you know, granted, you might be your whole alignment towards sex changes, but you know, maybe their partner's not so good at helping them to achieve an orgasm, but for lack of a better way to put it, um and other people, maybe having an orgasm is really a challenge to have. Yeah.
Right.
Mm.
What, through your experience and everything you've been through, and thinking about this a lot, because like, you know, I can't imagine the amount of therapy I want to help you how to seek for this.
I've been under a couple of years of therapy, probably 4, you know, with a couple of gaps every month or so. Yeah. And it's evolved as it's gone on. Like early on, I just thought I needed help with the trauma, and then it became clear that I needed someone who really understood religious trauma, because it's kind of different.
Mm,
Because it's kind of an ongoing trauma. And certainly for me, it was 17 years of gnosis. So,
wow. Reflecting on everything you've been through, what do you see in the world? It seems, I would imagine you have a very different perspective of the potential of cult-like thinking. Like, what, when going through your experience, what do you see in the world?
um, well, I understand that people can get wrapped up into an idealism of a group. So whether that's a political group, and we've certainly seen that with like Trump or even Hillary, you know, Clinton, uh, you know, being sort of uh, embedded, committed to a certain ideal. Um, and then you've got uh, maybe it's not political, maybe it's religious, but maybe it's more benign. You know, one of the go-tos in my brain is like CrossFit is, is a weird cultural phenomenon. Um, is something a cult, or is something just you're committing to something and you have discipline through that? It kind of depends on what you're talking about. It kind of depends on, is there actual damage being done to the people, to the person involved? Um, and that's sort of a question each person has to address themselves, I guess.
Well, do you, it sounds like obviously nowhere near to the same degree, but this idea of this, this a group of people having this strong commitment and looking, taking a blind eye towards everything, it sounds like, you know, everyone likes to believe, oh, okay, you know, you were in a cult, I can't see myself being in something like that, like I could never see that happen to me. But at the same time, so many of us are involved in like this, um cult like behaviors. I mean, you know, nowadays it seems like you're red or blue, you know, you're this or that.
Right. For sure. For sure. Yeah.
um wow. is there is there something that you think it's important that you want to mention to people about your experiences and being been through?
Um, just that if something doesn't feel right, if something feels like harm, to make sure that you question that you not question the fact that you feel harm, but like, well, maybe this isn't a good fit. Like spirituality, while discipline I think is important in whatever you want to do, whether it's finish college or start a new hobby, or, you know, be in a religion. Discipline is not harm. Discipline is just how you navigate your day. Like, there are people that Gnosis works great for, and booyah for them. Yay, I'm glad that that works for them. But I do know that there are people that suffer unnecessarily that are Gnostics, and um, if it's not the doctrine themselves itself, it's the culture of it that is harmful. So that would be my one thing, is that people look at what they invest themselves in and whether it causes them harm or suffering that's unnecessary,
Wow.
and then make moves to alleviate that by leaving the group or something.
And you know, one of the main reasons I wanted to talk to you is because I think this is what you're going through is is so extreme, and you know, it's I feel like more and more it seems like a lot of people are going through things not quite to the not definitely not quite to the same extreme, but definitely being abused in this cult like mentality. And
Sure. Yeah. I mean, Keith Raniere and Nexium is a good example. And at least we personally didn't experience that level of abuse and coercion. Um, like, we weren't committing thousands and thousands of dollars to a thing, and uh there was no like one man who's taking advantage of several people except for the Portland group. Um so I am grateful for that. Uh but yeah, I think people want I don't know if this is my impression of the American culture, because it might be different in other regions of the world. I think we in America want something that's meaningful and deep, and we're told we can do anything with our lives, and then our lives are kind of like basic for most of us. We have a job and we maybe start a family, and maybe that's not nearly as exciting as it was told it should be, job or family. And so we want more meaning in our lives. Certainly, our culture tells us that's important, when it's enough to just be a person. It really is just enough. Uh, but somehow we want more than that. Uh, we're certainly told we should want more than that. Uh, and I think learning to be happy with where we are is kind of important. Yeah.
that's a beautiful message. And I think that's going to resonate with a lot of people, honestly. And I mean, that certainly resonated with me. At the very least, I can say that. It's hard to feel like you're enough. And I can understand how
Yeah.
whether intentionally or not, when a group preys on that, you know, what that can lead to. So
Yeah. I mean, that's certainly, yeah, that's certainly one of the reasons that I I stuck around, was we were learning special knowledge, which made us special. It made us different. It made us unique. And this special knowledge was going to save us. And that's pretty uh, motivating for a while.
right. That's a very good point you touched on. It's this, there's something beyond, like, this is confirmation that there's something beyond what I see, what mothers perceive, and I am unique, and I am like you're saying, special for seeing this, and like you're saying with the spiritual leaders, where it's like, oh, they have something I don't, and this newfound
Yep.
knowledge, and they're the elders in this newfound knowledge.
Yep.
I can understand. And so once you got there, I mean, in a way, like, it's hard to imagine if you, I mean, I don't want to speak in, in definites, but if you didn't become a missionary and you weren't on the other side, it probably would have been harder to see that part of it.
I think so. I think so.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for your
Absolutely.
time. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely.